Welcome to our second Global MSC online event. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy days to come and join us here this afternoon. We're being broadcast live from the streaming studios of ISTED here in Coventry in the Central Midlands of the UK. And we really are a true global event today. Much as last time in November, it would take me too long for the whole seminar really to read out the list of the countries where you are signing up from and logging in from. But we are truly global right the way through across the UK, of course, Middle East, Africa, Asia, America, and we really thank you for taking the time out to join us. And the event content today, whilst we looked at analytics and AI in our November event, we really are now going to concentrate on developing the smart surveillance operator, those individuals perhaps inside a security control room. And to help us understand why we've gone down that road this time, I'm going to introduce you to Maltby, the Managing Director of Global MSC Security. He's going to tell us why he's chosen this particular theme today. Derek.
Thank you, David. So I deal with lots of local authorities and have done so for 20 odd years, dealing with analog systems where they move the joystick left, right, up and down to make the camera work to where they want it to go. But we're being required to install, specify more high-level technical systems which would have high-definition cameras and analytics and other bells and whistles that may be the same operators who've been brought up with analog are needing to get used to. And so it's with that sort of message to say, what are we providing for these operators to make them more efficient, and how can we help them to embrace this technology?
Okay, it's going to be a challenging time because for my own self, I've been around the security control and operations and management arena since 1997, and I've been a great advocate of the human element, those individuals in these security control rooms that need to engage with the technology from way back then to where we are today and obviously going through to the future. But to help us focus on that theme, we've got some really eminent speakers, of course, in that field. I'm just going to list them for you, so we've got some exciting lineup to come. I mean, we've got Dr. Craig Donald joining us very shortly from Johannesburg in South Africa, who is an expert organisational psychologist in his own business. We've got Professor James Ferryman here from Reading University, an expert in computational vision. And again, I have worked in the past with James and his team down at Reading. And again, we're delighted to be rejoined, if you like, by Tony Porter, who no longer is the Surveillance Camera Commissioner, although we all know, certainly many of us will know, that he hasn't long finished that role. But now he has a role as a Chief Privacy Officer at Coresight AR. So it'll be interesting to see his new angles coming from that particular work he's now engaged with. We'll be joined at the end by, or they will be joined at the end in a question-answer panel by Christian Moran. And some of you will be familiar with Christian from Genetech, and he will be joining us later on and bring his insight when we have the Q&A panel for hopefully around 30 minutes. You keep coming those questions in and we'll pose them to the experts and hopefully get the answers that you want, that you may have picked up on from their presentations, or indeed questions you have already anyway. To bring this event to you, we are really grateful for the sponsorship that we enjoy from some key industry players. And I just want to mention them because Genetech, Christian will join us later, Hanwha Techwin, you'll have some input from them during the seminar, and Bosch Security and Safety Systems, again, some input from them, a collaboration between some of the industry stakeholders that will help us understand this theme today. And finally, we give thanks to our International Security Journal colleagues who've given us our media coverage both before and indeed after this particular seminar. So that's the housekeeping done. Hopefully you feel warmly welcomed. I can't say good afternoon because it could be any time, anywhere, whenever you are. So what we do want to do, I don't know what time it is out in Johannesburg, but perhaps Craig will tell us. But I'm going to introduce you now to our first speaker of the event, Dr. Craig Donald, joining us from Joburg in South Africa. He's an organisational psychologist with a specialist involvement in crime behavioural analysis and detection and human factors in security technology integration. He's a Director of Advanced Development Applications and an Adjunct Associate Professor at ECU in Perth, Australia. Craig has trained behavioural analysis in crime detection courses in over 16 countries for police forces, UK, Australia, Poland, Singapore and Southern Africa. Government agencies and customs, town centres, aviation, universities, to name but a few, and also, and it's a phrase I think we're going to hear a little bit more about during the day, super recognisers. And I'm sure we got the opportunity to examine that phrase today. He's worked on integrating human factors and security technology with clients and international research institutions. It's good to see you and good to have you to join us today.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be with you.
Well, the floor is yours, my friend. Take care.
Thank you. I think we greet people in different ways. So, hello. I hope that accounts for most of the population who's going to be watching. We drink tea in different ways, and we drink different tea. In most of the world, this means no, and this means yes. Except in Bulgaria, where this means no, and this means yes. In most Western countries, if we want somebody to come to us, we indicate with our hand and say, come here. In Japan, in Korea, if you want somebody to come, you do this, which is a bit confusing for some Western people. If we look at catching a train, which is a relatively simple task, pre-lockdown, you catch a train from, say, Westminster tube station. To get onto the train during rush hour, it's like a strategic shuffle. English are still effectively very polite people, even in a shuffle kind of situation. So you position yourself through the crowd to get to the train doors after a couple of trains have usually gone past. In Tokyo or Kyoto, you wait in a queue on either side of the door, and it's all very organized. What does happen, though, if the train is full, they've perfected something that is almost like a wall slam, where the people waiting to get into the train move together, compress people inside, and free up another 30% so they can all fit inside the train. If you're in Cape Town on certain lines, it's a bit like a rugby game with an imaginary ball somewhere in the carriage. And people then rush to get this imaginary ball. And when the doors are full, they go through the windows. So behavior is complex, it's varied, it's affected by culture, location, relationships, and even the time of day, and it's affected by pandemics. So do we expect AI to see all of this behavior? Well, I grew up in the day of Neuromancer and Blade Runner, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and Terminator. So I've got quite high expectations of AI. But we don't expect it at this stage to get that kind of insight. But we're not too worried about that, because we focused on crime behavior, given this is a security forum. And we're looking at specific behaviors that are linked to crime, which have similarities internationally. So criminals have common strategies, and the crimes that they do have certain common signs or signature indicators that show that that crime is being committed. You need to do those effectively in order to commit the crime. So a shoplifter, whether they're shoplifting from a supermarket in Japan, New York City, St. Petersburg, or Nairobi, are going to show pretty much similar behaviors in order to shoplift from the supermarket. So I think that's our starting basis. A criminal has to do certain things in order to have a tactical approach to committing a crime. Criminals have plans. They may not always be very organized, they may be impromptu, but criminals have plans, and we can have a look at the insight into how they are planning on doing things. And as the progress of that plan carries on into the different stages of an incident, it gives us a chance to spot these behaviors, and ideally before the incident actually even happens. It could include things like reconnaissance. Looking over your shoulder would be an example. Target identification, looking more closely at a particular thing. Positioning, getting closer to the object that you're wanting to steal or the person you may want to assault. timing of acquisition, waiting until people have gone past so you can then move in and get the things, and checking out your escape routes to make sure that you can get away once you've committed the crime as well. If we're looking at syndicates and syndicate behavior, we're looking at how people look at each other, whether they're subtle signs, for example, a head nod, a finger, just wait, because that will then tell us there's more than one person involved in what's going on. So can AI pick up these crime behaviors? Well, for me, it's a yes and it's a no. AI or analytics usually have a very specific focus that they're concentrating on. And on that basis, they are addressing one aspect of crime behavior and they may ignore others altogether. Where I find they're really good is movement, especially in areas where you don't expect movement or you don't expect a direction of movement. You have a look at people moving towards a target area or a target. You have excessive activity within a particular area. So all of those kinds of factors are aspects that really give us an idea that something is unusual, and they can be linked very directly to the likelihood of an intruder or somebody doing something wrong. So in the video example that's going to be shown in a moment, I'll take you through a little bit of what happens in that particular crime. So in this case, it's a dual electric fence on the perimeter of a residential estate. We have somebody who's been pretty athletic getting across the top of the fence. They jump off the fence into a zone that's been predefined, which activates, looks at the image of the object who's violated that space, and based on the size and the height would conclude that it's an object rather than, say, a flock of birds or an animal or something like that. So this kind of thing is relatively easy for it to do. And there are a couple of aspects that I want to pick up on just from this video. The first one is that this person is not a ninja. He's not on an assassination attempt. He's not trying to rob Fort Knox. He's a house burglar. He wants to get into this estate, rob a house, and get out with stuff. And yet the behavior we see is quite remarkable. I doubt whether anybody listening would actually try do the same kind of thing if I offered them £100 or £1,000. So people who are criminals do things that we are not expecting, which makes it quite difficult to make provision for. But if you're looking at 8 to 10 kilometers of fence line, to spot the behavior becomes very difficult. So we're back at the main presentation, I presume. All right. So just showing you a couple of behaviors then. So how many anxiety signs did I show in the last few seconds? Well, the correct answer would be 8, but I might have shown some subconscious signs unknowingly, and so the number may be higher. Let me know if you saw them. Why is it important? Because we use anxiety to identify potential criminals, because when a criminal enters a position where they might get apprehended or there's a chance of being caught, they start becoming anxious. Anxiety signs are a way to pick this up. But we find these reasons for anxiety signs for other purposes as well. If I'm anxious about doing this presentation, I'm going to show anxiety signs. If I'm worried about catching my train and I'm late, I'm going to show anxiety signs. So there's a really critical element to any viewing of situations, and that is context. The social context in which it happens allows us to interpret whether it's a problem or not, or whether it's perfectly innocent behavior. So behavior analysis officers have a unique advantage here because they operate in certain environments, and they can ask people questions about what they see and what they're doing and so on. Super recognizers, as was mentioned earlier, we do training for crime detection as well, crime behavior detection, because if you see certain crime indicators happening and you go and look at that area and the people there, there's a chance that you might spot your person of interest. If we're looking at a person of interest and we see them communicating to other people around them, that means that potentially we have a syndicate, and a number of people of interest come out of that at the end of the day. So if you've got a person walking down a road outside a pub, staggering late at night with a bottle in their hands, you come to a certain assumption. If the person's doing the same thing outside a hospital, you have a totally different kind of interpretation based on what you see. So context is really important in terms of what goes on. Now, AI doesn't read behavior. It uses shapes, shifts in pixels or shapes, movement in pixels to establish a reference that may be correlated to a behavior of some type. It's not particularly insightful, it's not intuitive, it's not particularly innovative, although some of the developers are extremely innovative. It relies on algorithms that are programmed by people or in some cases modified by itself. So if we want to make AI able to effectively detect crime behavior, we need to provide it with the signs that it has to look for. So we come back to how do crimes happen according to a strategy of a criminal and what behaviors get exhibited as part of that. And there are three areas where we can source that kind of information for our AI. The first one is from security people. The second one is from the developers themselves. And the third one would be from the software itself in terms of a learning situation. So how easy is it for security specialists to provide these inputs? I visited a control room for a major UK city a few years ago with some other visitors, and while we were there, they picked up a group of youths doing some drug dealing. And one of the visitors asked the operator, "How did you pick that up?" The operator said, "It's a feeling, intuition. You see, you just get a feel what's going on." And the visitor said, "Oh, that's really cool." But it's not really that cool, because there were a whole lot of signs that were being broadcast that this activity was being taken place. And the problem was that the operators weren't aware of these signs. They couldn't quantify why they were looking at it. So, for example, there was a lot of looking around and checking the area. There was a lot of movement on the feet. There was a fair amount of blocking with the body and convergence in terms of creating a private space, and then using a tree as part of the barrier as well for any potential surveillance. So those signs are direct indicators that that kind of crime is occurring. And the more people are aware of what to look for, the better. So you train your people in those indicators, and we train AI, ideally, in those indicators as well. But you have to know those indicators in order to train the AI about them. So operators in high crime neighborhoods typically become much more sensitized and much better at picking things up. And if we have a look at town centers in the UK, drunk behavior, public disturbances around about 11:30 on a Friday, Saturday night, the guys become really good at picking it up. In fact, they know it's going to happen before it even happens because it's usually the case. So you've got a very good insight into that, but you need to more generalize this behavior to other applications ideally as well. Whether we're talking about people or AI, we need an appreciation, firstly, of these criminal strategies and the crime signatures that happen. We need exposure to behavior-rich video or situations of a sufficient quality, showing these crime indicators so people can get familiar with them. And we need a critical mass of crime-based examples showing sufficient variations of the target behavior so people can identify that. So I've been building up a crime library for some 20 years or so. And I find that I probably keep about 0.01% of video that I'm exposed to, because the quality just simply isn't there, and the information that you're wanting to show people and get them into isn't necessarily there either. So we have the same problem in terms of sensitizing AI to the kind of things that we're wanting them to look for. The other thing we can do is we can ask the developers to do it. So AI developers tend, in my view, tend to come from a point of view where we've got these super technology tools, let's see where we can use them. Although I think that's changing now to more of a case of what are people wanting and how can we now tailor it to get a result for that. But these AI developers tend to be quiet, introverted, smart, analytical people maybe slightly obsessive, but in a good way in terms of following through on stuff. And I'm generalizing here, and it's certainly no reflection on the next speaker, who I've never met and I don't know. But they're not criminals. They're using theory, discussions to now come up with their models of what to look for. They don't go into dark alleys at night and make people. Maybe a bit of hacking on the side would be the maximum kind of stuff they would do. So they are analytical and they're insightful. And I found surprisingly good information coming out of some articles around how they are starting to look at behavior almost better than a psychologist or a security officer in terms of what's going on and how to pick it up. But their recognition is being built into the AI recognition. And there's no ways that we can avoid the contamination because they're using their skill base, their expertise base, their value systems, and sometimes their prejudices in terms of developing those kinds of contents. So given that, we haven't really got the kind of exposure that we're wanting from those people to crime, and there's an issue around how they incorporate it into the systems as well. Self-learning, there's a lot of systems out there that people say they learn themselves. You just put them in and then they'll start telling you after a while what's wrong. I'm not a great fan of learning systems because I think that there are systematic environmental issues and certainly patterns in terms of behavior that we all see and we do every day. You wake up at a certain time, you make a cup of coffee, same brand, you have your shower, you sit in the same chair to have breakfast, you leave your house at the same time, you take the same path down to the station, and you often will stand on the same spot on the station waiting for the train. It's a simple thing. People are creatures of habit. So there are ways to pick up these patterns, and you can learn that through AI. But AI is not picking up crime behavior, it's picking up differences. And it means that you could potentially be due for a lot of learning input to make sure how it understands these differences, or a lot of false alerts as part of that process. If a syndicate has been working in the area without being detected for the past 3 months, that's also going to be considered normal in terms of the day-to-day activities which are being viewed. So there are some issues around that. Also, they break the sudden events. So as soon as you go into lockdown, you've got potentially 3 to 6, however many months of learning that's literally thrown out the window overnight. But there are some roles for self-learning, and where we can make it easier, it's a lot better. So moving into the control room issue and the environment into the control room. AI is particularly good, like I said, at defined, less complex areas where the rules can be specified and the variability is going to be limited. And it can do those kinds of things exceptionally well. So the danger is when we're getting lots of false alarms, and that can have an implication in terms of how people have to verify every activity that occurs. And if you've been pulled into verification activities rather than the real life ones that you're supposed to be doing, it distracts quite significantly. Teaching, also an issue. Teaching is going to be a demanding task. It's going to pull people away from their core functions, and the teachers are going to be variable in their quality. So AI comes into its own when it's dealing with data, big data sets, intelligence systems, intelligence-led surveillance, presumes that your data is going to be up to date, your sources can be trusted, and it's legal. And when you introduce this technology, you need to bear in mind the human factors impact. It's going to change the social dynamics in the control room. It's going to change the operations, what you prioritize. It's going to change procedures. And then one last aspect is that criminals don't stand still. They move in accordance with how they can try and beat the systems, whether it's people or whether it's AI. So how good is AI going to be at working out that it's got a competition, that the people are trying to beat it? I'm not entirely sure how it's going to keep up, because people are going to be an essential aspect of this. So we want AI to seamlessly, instantly, with minimum operator involvement, interface into our control rooms, allowing operators to take up the command and control decision-making that they need to, and making an operational response to the right situation. It makes operators look smart, and it makes IT look smart. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Craig. Always enlightening. I remember very much myself listening to you speak at C3 User Group conferences many years ago and being inspired by your thinking, and I still use some of your material to this day in the classroom when I'm teaching advanced control room operators to a higher level of skills. So to listen to you again today, fascinating stuff, and I'm sure every one of you out there was listening to that and thinking, okay, where's this going to go? But what reassured me, and I think hopefully will reassure many operators in control rooms, is that technology alone is not enough. It's got to be a collaboration between the technology and those unique human factors and those human skills that operators and managers of security control rooms do have. So the idea of AI taking over and suddenly our human interface, our operators and staff inside a control room is going to be made redundant, I think is some way off yet. But nonetheless, embracing the technology together with those human skills is definitely the way forward. So thank you for that insight, Craig. And again, for those of you out there who may have questions or comments to make on that, fire them in through the chat pane. And of course, Craig will be joining us at the Q&A panel at the end of this seminar. So moving forward with our programme then, our next space is going to be occupied by our sponsor session, the first of several sponsor sessions. And we're going to be joined by Kerry Evans, who's a regional account manager, and his colleague Adam Radley, an A&E consultant from Hanwha Techwin, here in the studio, are going to take us through about 10 minutes of information shared with them. So welcome, gentlemen. Good to see you. Your opportunity is with you now.
Thanks for the intro, David. So, wanted to start by thanking Derek, Paola and the team for creating this event and letting us be part of it for a number of reasons. Firstly, it's a really great opportunity to listen to some really interesting and challenging topics from the speakers on the panel. It's also great to share the stage with Bosch and Genetec, two great solution providers within our field. Finally, and most importantly, it's a great opportunity for me and Adam to get squeezed back into our suits, get away from our four walls, screaming children and annoying cats. So thanks, guys, really appreciate it. So my name is Kerry. I'm the Regional Account Manager for Hanwha Techwin in the UK. Adam, do you want to do a bit of an intro?
Yeah, my name's Adam Radley and I am the A&E consultant for the UK arm of the company.
For those of you that don't know us, I'll try and give a bit of a background into Hanwha Techwin before Adam can blow you away with a more practical look into some of our technologies, especially technologies that we feel can help you work smarter, not harder, within a security control room. So on to the company piece. The Hanwha Group is a large South Korean conglomerate spanning 70 years of business. The business was established in 1952 and is one of the top 10 business enterprises in South Korea with a turnover of 60 billion. The Hanwha Group has 70 affiliates within the group across a number of different industries. Hanwha's manufacturing and construction business encompass a broad range of fields from aerospace and mechatronics, global construction, chemicals and materials, and total solar energy solutions. The service and leisure sector offers premium lifestyle services with retail and resort businesses. The finance network, covering insurance, asset management and securities, is the second largest non-bank financial group in South Korea. We're a bit of an unknown giant. We're a Ptz 500 company. Putting that into some perspective, we are currently number 261 on the list. We're bigger than Coca-Cola, American Express, Mitsubishi Electric, and hot on the tails of the likes of Facebook. We truly are a massive global player. In 2015, Hanwha acquired Samsung Techwin in a strategic acquisition. This allowed Samsung to focus on consumer products and for Hanwha to get into the security industry. So Hanwha has refocused the Techwin subsidiary to become a major competitor in the video security industry. Our global HQ is based in South Korea. Our cameras, recorders, and encoders are all manufactured by us in-house. Our two manufacturing facilities are located in South Korea and Vietnam. The factory in Vietnam was a $100 million investment by the Hanwha Group and opened in 2018. These chosen locations for the manufacturing Hanwha security solutions was a strategic decision based on a number of reasons. We wanted to increase the manufacturing output, drive down our costs, improve logistics, give us a platform to drive innovation, which in turn helps us meet the demands of an ever-changing market. We truly are a global company with offices situated around the world. Our European HQ is proud to be based in Chertsey. Chertsey is the home to our tech support, purpose-built training centre and demo facility, product marketing, sales support, plus all other back office functions, back office support functions. So please get in touch after the presentation if you either want to find out more about our STEP partner program or further demos on our solutions. A couple of key takeaways which are very relevant at the moment before I hand over to Adam are: we are an NDAA approved manufacturer, and we sit on and are a part of ONVIG going forward. Adam, over to you.
Thank you, Kerry. So my name is Adam Radley. I am the A&E consultant within the business, and I'm just going to do a little bit relating to some of the history of where we've been with video intelligence within CCV security, and I'm going to show a couple of videos towards the end as well. So I've got a very short sort of couple of slides on the history of video intelligence. I have some bits and pieces on auto tracking with AI functionality, and then I've got a great video showing smart tracking on one of our multi-sensor cameras as well. So I think from a history perspective, most people are probably familiar with aspects such as motion detection. You draw an area of interest on your screen and the software or the system alerts you to when there's some sort of movement or activity within that zone. Taking that to the next step, we have aspects such as intelligent video analytics. In the image that's on the screen at the moment, that is a vehicle moving across a virtual tripwire in the direction of an arrow, so I can have more rules, more control over what I'm interested in. Taking that on a step further, to AI object classification. This is the ability for our solutions to actively manage and identify different types of targets within a specified field of view. So a short video to talk about some of these aspects. Starting off with the motion detection. As I said, I think we're all fairly familiar with this. You have an area on your screen where there's an area of interest, and a subject, in this case a person, walks into that zone, and the software or the system identifies to you that. That's great, but relatively limited in terms of some of the information you can get back from it. Taking that step further onto video analytics, what I've got here is a virtual tripwire with an area of interest and a line direction crossing. So when the subject crosses in the direction of the line, the alarm is generated. And compare that to the same subject crossing in the opposite direction, or, in what's about to happen, a vehicle which I'm not interested in, which is crossing in the direction of the arrow. Both the person walking across the line the wrong way and the vehicle are ignored because they're not part of my rule. Moving on to the AI object classification that I was discussing, we've got a lot more going on here. So I've got people being tracked, I've got vehicles being identified and tracked as well, with different coloured options specified on that. I have face recognition, so that's looking for a face in terms of it being a face, not taking that and comparing it to a database to identify it. And with the video paused here, you can also see that on the left-hand side, I've got what we call our best shot identification. So this is the best shot of a particular vehicle or a series of vehicles, identifying colour. It's identifying the type of vehicle. Is it a private car? Is it a commercial vehicle, such as a bus or a van? With the person that's identified as well, I've got gender classification, I have clothing colours. I can also run algorithms to say, is this person wearing a face mask? Are they wearing glasses? Are they carrying a bag? And I can do all of this with identification direction controls as well. So that even down to a level of saying, is that person walking from left to right, or any of those sort of controls. Now, talking about a couple of our new products, this is an XNP9300RW. This is one of our AI Ptz cameras. It's a 4K resolution device, high level of image quality. It's got a 200-meter IR illumination built into it, as well as with a 30 times optical zoom. AI auto tracking in terms of classifying, are we looking for people or looking for vehicles? And in a first for one of our products, a built-in wiper on this particular camera, which helps it to stay nice and clear in all weather conditions. Now, this video is great. It was actually taken about a month ago, and although it doesn't look like it, this was about 6:45 in the morning. It's actually quite dark. The low light control on this camera is fantastic. It's picked up the subject and it's automatically tracking, and it's automatically resizing in terms of the zoom as well. So it's able to keep that subject in the middle of the field of view. I can have that running for as long as I need to. I can also have different types of algorithms running against that as well in terms of area control, direction of interest, anything like that. Now, this particular camera, this is our PNM 9322 VQP. It's a multi-sensor camera. It's got 5 cameras in it, 4 modules in an upper ring, and those modules can be 2 megapixel or 5 megapixel, fixed focal lengths at different focal adjustments as required. Slung underneath it is a 32 times optical zoom PTZ, and the modules are smart linked together. That means I can specify the coordinates on the fixed modules, and I can have the PTZ recognizing when there's movement in one of those and reacting to it. So an auto tracking event on here. I've set up a virtual line, the same sort of line as you saw me do earlier on. And then I've also gone on to the PTZ camera and told it critically how high it is in terms of its mounting position and its auto tracking algorithms. And in the video we've now got, the PTZ is in the lower left-hand corner in the larger image. As the subject crosses the virtual tripwire, the PTZ swivels to that location. I didn't need to set a preset for that to occur. As that subject then starts to move around within that PTZ camera's field of view, the system will start auto tracking. And even though the preset camera positions as they're dotted around that screen are looking in different directions, the PTZ itself is going to be doing the auto tracking, and it's going to track that subject as they move through all of the field of view areas that that camera is currently monitoring. Now, consider large areas on an industrial site. Cameras could be positioned so they're looking at great distances, but an alarm or event on any one of those modules could trigger the PTZ to go to that position and to start the auto tracking. As that camera is just finishing off that last bit there, you'll see it's still zooming in and out. It's still able to keep that person in its field of view. And when the subject does finally walk away from the field of view, the camera itself would continue to zoom in and zoom out and hunt, just in case there is any option or possibility of that person returning back into that field of view. And it's not just our high-end cameras that have these levels of functionality. We have a wide range of products available, from our X series with our WiseNet 7 chipset now being released, with the P series, multi-sensor devices and high-resolution cameras, but even our quality level entry models. They're more cost-effective, but they still have a lot of those functionality options built into them. The auto tracking on the PTZs, the area tripwires, the ability to interactively and intelligently monitor activity in front of those devices and report back on it. We have a large amount of functionality available across the range. That's it from us. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you, Kerry and Adam. A useful insight there from a manufacturer, supplier, a brand well recognised globally. And again, if you need to expand on anything in relation to what you've just seen, of course, anybody globally will be available for you to interface with, and we thank them for their efforts today. Moving on, though, of course, is now we're going to switch to another academic input from a well-respected individual. Again, I've had the pleasure some time ago there since I met him, but now Professor James Ferryman is going to join us, and he's a Professor of Computational Vision at the University of Reading. It's important I read his resume just so you've got a feel for who he's going to be speaking to this afternoon. He's here with us in the studio, which is great. He's a computer scientist and leads the Computational Vision group within the Department of Computer Science at the School of Mathematical, Physical and Computational Sciences, SMPCS for short, at the University of Reading. His current research includes automated video surveillance, multimodal biometrics and benchmarking. He is an author of more than 100 scientific publications and has participated in a wide range of UK and EU funded research programmes, including being a lead on the ESB EPSRC Reason project on robust methods for monitoring and understanding people in public spaces, and a partner in the EPSRC VITAB on video-based threat assessment and biometrics. So clearly a useful expert to have with us today when we're talking about developing smart operations. Overall, he's a coordinator of the EU H2020 project on the exploration of current future use of biometrics in border security. Professor Ferryman is a member of the British Computer Society and has acted as the director of both the British Machine Vision Association and the Security Information Technology Consortium. Since 2000, James has been a co-chair of the IEEE International Workshop on Performance Evaluation of Tracking and Surveillance. So, again, what a resume he has in terms of all this technology interfacing with humans. And we welcome him to the studio. We welcome him as part of our seminar. And James, it's over to you. That's one resume. Okay.
Thank you very much indeed for that very kind introduction. Did an excellent job there with the acronyms as well. Okay, so very nice to see everyone today. Thank you for attending, and again, thank you for the invitation to the event. So my name is Professor James Ferryman, as you've heard, from the University of Reading. You heard also that I'm a professor in computational vision. Essentially, that means computer science. I'm really a data scientist, and my specialism, as you heard, is in surveillance technologies, but also in biometrics. So broadly, visual surveillance and computer vision. Now, I say I work on surveillance and biometrics, but today I really want to focus particularly on behaviour analysis in wide area visual surveillance. And you heard earlier from Craig, actually, in terms of the behavioural science, I would say, around looking for suspicious activities or people perhaps in scenes, and how we can start to translate some of that into computational science. How can we really build AI-powered systems that can actually try to incorporate this notion of context and really these very subtle behavioural cues that can be picked up by operators. So this is really something that we really focus on in our research. Okay, so let me move on. So what I want to cover first is just very briefly at the beginning, just to cover what we do in the Computational Vision Group, to give you a broad perspective. I'll then go into what I mean by automated behaviour analysis. I'll give you some examples around the research and innovation. What does that mean in this context? And really, what are some case studies? I'll give you a broad range of case studies in principle, but I want to just focus in on a couple of case studies to give you some more insight into how the technology works. But I want to just make it real in the sense that we're academics and we don't believe, of course, that everything is solved. I'd be out of a job if basically surveillance was a solved problem domain. So there are still challenges. There are a lot of challenges still remaining to make these kinds of AI-type systems much more robust, of course, and work in real time and so on in real scenes. And I just want to mention also at the end very briefly about standards as well, because I think standardization, benchmarking is very important in this research area. Okay, so just to give you a very brief idea, so as I mentioned, I lead something called the Computational Vision Group. Essentially means computer vision, advanced image analysis, and biometrics. So we have three main kind of areas of research. Firstly, probably most relevant today is the automated multi-sensor multimodal surveillance. And you'll see some ideas and applications of that later in the presentation. But broadly speaking, if you have multiple sensors, perhaps CCTV cameras, so those kinds of sensor networks can be installed and deployed in a whole range of different scenarios. So we see examples, for example, in public space surveillance, but it could equally be on ships and so on and so forth, and border security is another one. We also do a lot of work on remote sensing. So typically that could be from satellite imagery, so remote image understanding, satellite image understanding, but also it could be, for example, from drones. And finally, I do a lot of work on multimodal biometrics. So we're interested in biometrics, particularly, for example, contactless, frictionless biometrics on the move. That's also a big area that I work in. Okay, so these are some application domains. So public space surveillance is more what I'll focus on today. But maritime surveillance is another big area. And I want to just sort of give you the idea already that the research is somewhat agnostic of the platform. So when we talk about multi-sensor networks and systems for doing AI sensing, you could deploy those for surveillance of car parks or other public spaces. It could be on board assets like ships, for example, so for example for counter-piracy. But equally, it could be in border security. We had the Earth observation. It could be for protection of critical infrastructure, and Craig gave the example earlier with the perimeter protection, for example, or in healthcare monitoring. So lots of different application spaces for this work in behavioural modelling. Okay, so what do I mean actually by automated behaviour analysis? Well, we already know, I think, to a large extent what we mean by tracking in terms of surveillance, for example, detection of people, tracking of people, and things like this. But behaviour analysis is essentially the high or top-end part of the system, assuming, for example, that you are able to reliably detect events or detect objects like people, for example, or vehicles, and even you can go as far as tracking those objects reliably through scenes. What can we then do with that information? How can we infer or perform inference over that data, for example, to detect anomalous activity, anomalous behaviour? Even, for example, to detect threats. So that's really what behaviour analysis is. We go from the detection side to the tracking to then performing this high-level behaviour analysis. And as I say, we really want to use this for detecting a wide range of different kinds of incidents or anomalies or behaviours, adverse behaviours, or even threats. It has to be an acceptable system as well. So any system that's devised to do this has to be acceptable to you, to the operator, to the end user, in particular around false alarms, and I'll mention that very much in a moment, because for any surveillance application, we don't want to have a high rate of false alarms. We have to have a level that's acceptable to the user. That's extremely important. And as mentioned, we want to try to emulate the operator's ability to infer behaviour, like we saw with the idea of the shopper behaviour, or trying to infer criminals just through the very subtle cues that they exhibit in the scene. So another good example of that is what we call intentionality analysis. So can we devise a computer vision system that can actually recognise intent? That's really a big task, but this is what the research is about. So basically, I would argue that current generation automated CCTV is relatively unintelligent. Yes, we're getting much better today at systems that can do robust detection, perhaps even tracking, but that high-level behavioural analysis is still very context-dependent. If you consider the wide plethora of scenes in which you can deploy these systems, these systems are relatively still very simple in terms of the behavioural and event understanding they can perform. But we want to perform complex reasoning. We have to perform complex reasoning and able to understand, for example, intentionality. So the research innovation in Reading, in particular, is focused on the application of AI, soft computing techniques, and also social science to enhance intelligence. And that's really something I want to instill in you, is how we can make this interdisciplinary. It's not just about pure computer science, it's about combining computer science, data science with, for example, behavioural psychologists and speaking to the operators themselves to instill that intelligence that they have and the ideas of social behavioural science into the process. Okay, so the first case study I want to just give you an idea about, to give you a bit of a hint on what we can actually do, is something around a very specific task, but the reason for doing that is to contextualise it for the methods we're going to use. So this is around unattended luggage. Now, in a very naive way, we can perform with a surveillance system, perhaps a multi-camera surveillance system in a public space, we could survey the scene, we can potentially detect objects in the scene, of course, and perhaps even go as far as detecting abandoned objects from a detection point of view. But that's only really part of the story, because if you really want to understand whether something's really abandoned or not, you've got to understand the setting, the context, and particularly the social context. For example, you're out with a family, you got your luggage with you, you put luggage down, and then perhaps you go off to the toilet or something, but that luggage has been left with someone who's trusted. But how can we teach a system, an AI system, to understand that? To understand actually that anything that's abandoned is actually just not a threat. In very few cases, actually, there really persists a real threat. So the idea behind this work, which is an EU project, was to find abandoned luggage, but essentially to also identify and track the owner. So in a simple sense, yes, a pure detection system could detect an object that's been abandoned. But when you start to think from the outset, what's actually led up to that process? What's actually led up to that object being abandoned, the luggage? And then also, what's happened afterwards? So we need to track and identify whoever is associated with that luggage, for example. But beyond that, we also want to exploit knowledge of behavioural and social context as well within the scene, which I'll come to in a moment. And the overall objective, of course, is to reduce the number and the impact of false alarms. Again, that's obviously so critical, which I'm sure many of you understand. Now, I don't want to go into all the ins and outs of the technology, for example, for doing the tracking, but just to give you a little bit of insight, we use probabilistic models, we use multi-hypothesis trackers to do actually tracking of individuals in the scene, and we use what we call homography techniques. We actually use a multi-camera system. It's a bit like, in a way, it's a bit like the Hawkeye system for Wimbledon for tracking the balls in the scene, for telling you whether there's a fault. We use a similar kind of system, actually, for localising and tracking people in crowded scenes. And that always is a challenge in surveillance, is when you have people in close proximity. How do you really track them as individuals, particularly when they're in groups or in close proximity to one another? So we have a system for reliable tracking, robust tracking of individuals. And at the same time, we also have a system for doing robust detection of bags or abandoned objects. So these two parts of the system work in tandem together, basically to track the people reliably and to also detect abandoned objects. But as I mentioned, that's only really started the system, start of the overall process. The most interesting part is to do the threat assessment, to actually understand whether the bag is actually a threat. Now, in this part of the, in this example of a scenario, in this particular case study, we are using a rule-based knowledge. We're using expert knowledge, and we heard that earlier with Craig. So this is a case where we obtain the expert knowledge on what it actually constitutes a threat, and encode that through a set of rules, and this is a rule-based system. So in very simple terms, and it's more complex than this in practice, but you can say, for example, a bag is unattended if no person's within a certain distance, and also it's abandoned if it's unattended for a certain amount of time. But that's only part of the story again. That's some kind of abandonment rules. What we can then do to that is add the concept of ownership. Who owns that bag? And we can derive that from the tracking. We know prior to the bag being dropped and afterwards who was associated with that bag. We can attach that, the ownership, to an individual that's been tracked, or individuals in fact. But also we can go one step further. We can actually augment that concept of ownership with social relations, and that's really the important point here. So we can actually exploit contextual knowledge about social relations, and that really is the key to reducing the number of false positives. And actually this is extending a branch of work that the government started a few years ago on social behavioural science, and really the idea was to instill this interdisciplinary work, and this is something that reflects that effort, I hope. So the idea is to use a social force model. What does that basically mean? The model actually models the interactions between individuals. So basically, are the individuals in the group, are they known to each other? So we have an automatic online inference of social groups from the observed trajectories of the people that we've extracted from the tracking system. And then based on that social force model, we can specify what we call repulsive, goal-directed and group forces that influence the individuals. So based on whether someone is inferred to know someone else or not, we can use that to then interpret the actual trajectory data in a different way. And that actually is then exploited to help identify whether a bag is truly abandoned or not. So here's just a simple example to show you. So as I mentioned, we have rules for abandoned baggage based on ownership, distance and time rules, for example. We stage scenarios to demonstrate this where, for example, actually in the traditional sense where we don't have the social force model, we have a lot of false alarms in understanding whether something's truly been abandoned or not. But when we applied the social force model, it was able to identify the group relations and reduce significantly the number of false alarms. So this is a really good example, I believe, where really the application of both expert knowledge and the social force model can really help the operator, or only flag to the operator when there really truly is something that's actually unusual or even a threat. And we develop a nice user interface as well for the operator to actually demonstrate this. And this was, by the way, this was demonstrated, as you probably might, if some of you recognise this, this was demonstrated actually at Victoria train station in central London. The second case study is asset protection. Now, I know many of you in the audience are maybe interested in protecting assets of some form. Now, asset to me means either a fixed asset, which could be, for example, critical infrastructure even, but I'm particularly thinking of mobile assets here, like trucks carrying high-value goods. And I think you're aware that in recent months there's been more in the news about targeting of particular high-value assets which are mobile, actually, goods, for example. So here's an example where we're using a different form of behavior analysis. It's based on what we call soft computing. It actually exploits both a combination of expert knowledge, but also, in this case, also learns activity zones. So there's actually learning being built into this as well. It's what we call multi-resolution, and you'll see why that is the case in a moment, because we can abstract the interpretation at different levels. But it's also semantic rich. What does that mean? It means that the interpretation of the behaviors is something that becomes meaningful to the operator. So we're not just purely giving you a binary output, for example. We're actually giving you an interpretation that's actually useful. And of course, the idea is to detect in particular abnormal activities or threats. So here's an example here with a car park. Now, I want to again give you as a second example. So we built a system where, for example, you could look at, well, it could be deployed across a range of assets, but this particular case is actually protecting a high-value goods in a parked truck in this case, like a sort of like a semi kind of car park, or could be a stop place environment. Now, on the left-hand side, you actually, the operator can actually define a priori, can define certain areas, whether it's the rest area or where the truck is and so on. But in the middle of the diagram, and then on the right-hand side, this is actually where the system has actually learned zones automatically. So it actually learns through observation where, for example, the pedestrian entry points are, or the exit points are, or the surface areas and things like this. And on the right-hand side, we can even increase the granularity to even have more specific areas where perhaps individuals are standing or moving from one place to another. But my point is that this is a learnt process. So we start with some expert knowledge at a very simple level, but the rest of the process is essentially learnt automatically and at different levels of granularity. And then we can actually instill a whole range of different behaviours to be detected. And this is just one example where we're looking here, for example, the case of loitering, because obviously loitering in an environment that may be containing a high-value asset might be of interest, of course. So this is a case where we can semantically extract and parse the trajectories which are extracted through a computer vision system, and actually then seek to understand through a semantic interpretation whether something is really anomalous or not. In this case, whether it fits with the model, what actually is defined by loitering. And that's again coming from expert knowledge. We define exactly with rules what we mean by loitering in this context. So that's just a very quick example. What I'd like to show you is just an excerpt from a video which shows this in practice, but also shows you the interface to the operator as well.
If you, for example, have somebody loitering at the smoking area, that's quite normal behavior. On the other side, if you see someone at a distance looking at the truck and he waits until the driver goes away from the truck, and at that moment that person approaches the truck with probably intent of a theft, at that moment we want to raise an alarm and send it to the HMI of the arena system.
So the human-machine interface, or HMI, is basically a window into the onboard system. The system is doing a lot of processing to detect threats to the vehicle, and the HMI's primary purpose is to notify the human users of those threats. There are actually two HMIs which are developed in the project. The first was one which runs on a mobile phone. So we developed an Android application which is used by the driver. If the system on board the truck detects a threat or some suspicious behavior, the driver's phone receives a message and also an image, and then the driver can either dismiss or confirm the threat and take appropriate action. The second HMI is designed for use in an office environment where an operator might be monitoring more than one truck which is using the arena system. So one of the windows in the interface is a list of all the trucks under protection, and if a threat or some suspicious behavior is detected around the vehicle, the truck will start flashing either yellow or red for warning and alert, and the operator can then open another set of windows which shows more detailed information about what's going on. So there's an interface to view the feed from a specific camera, and the objects and tracks are overlaid on the image. And if the object is suspicious or threatening, it's ringed in either yellow or red. There is also a two-dimensional plan, like a map view, a kind of bird's eye view of the truck and the immediate surroundings, and the objects and tracks are marked around the vehicle on the map. And the third view is a kind of multi-camera view which shows all of the cameras simultaneously, and the operator can switch between the views to work out whether there is really a threat or not. So the system is ideal for maybe a trucking company or a private security company.
Okay, so and just to give you an instance here, just to illustrate again that the technology that we developed is actually agnostic to the application. So you saw there a nice example, I think, of a mobile asset. But we worked on projects applying the same technology for counter-piracy. So you see in the top left, we actually deployed a multi-sensor system around a cargo ship and can actually do counter-piracy detection, fast-moving skiffs towards the boat, what constitutes a threat actually, so similar principles. And again, something very different. On the right, we're currently working on a project called Fold Out, which is looking at a whole multi-sensory system. We're doing border surveillance using both satellite, UAVs, ground-based surveillance sensors and so on. Multi-sensory system, but feeding into this behavioural analysis step again to actually infer whether the movements in forested areas at green border surveillance zones, whether someone's illicitly crossing borders. So, but using the same technology as you just saw. I just want to finish by saying that there are challenges remaining. So, I want to be honest with you. The systems still need to be made more robust to operate continuously, 24 hours a day, 52 days a week, to make them real time. Computation is getting much better today, but there's still challenges there. Make it scalable to large camera networks, for example, but also, of course, to make the reasoning more complex still and to really understand all the interactions between people and their environment. And finally, just mention about standards. I think it's something very important to mention. Standardization of automated surveillance is still very much work in progress. When you look at the standards landscape, and I did a little work for the European Commission on this, it's still in its infancy. There are standards in place at various aspects of the processing chain, but still a lot to be done here. And there's a long development cycle to even establish new standards. I think what's really interesting is that there's still no universally agreed set of metrics for evaluating the performance of surveillance systems. So there has been some efforts in that space, but there's still, whether it's UK or not, well, certainly no EU-wide or even worldwide certification scheme for security systems or analytics systems. And that's something I think we should really work on together. And I do a lot of work in benchmarking. I would really like to work with you to actually enable that to happen. So if you have some good ideas, maybe it'll come up in the questions, but if you have some good ideas how we could further that kind of work, I'd be very interested to hear from you. So thank you very much indeed. I hope you enjoyed the presentation.
To get us off in our part two is our second sponsorship session, and we're now going to be joined by Carl Hall, who's the head of business development of Bosch Security and Safety Systems, and he has a 10-minute window with you to enlighten us with regard to Bosch. So if Carl is there, I'm told he's ready and waiting for us. Carl, it's over to you.
Yes, thank you very much.
It's all yours,
David, and thanks also to Derek at Global MSC for allowing us to be part of the event today. I've been watching as a delegate for the earlier session. It's been really interesting to hear the previous speakers talk about behavioural analysis and social context. So it's been a good watch so far. So as David said, I'm the head of business development for the Security and Safety Systems division of Bosch in the UK. And I'm going to be looking at this from a manufacturer's perspective of the type of technology that we can bring to for smart surveillance operators. So we're going to look at three core areas today. So we're going to look at analytics rules to give alerts to operators. We're going to look at a new open camera platform called Intiox to increase the pool of relevant alerts, and also look at all this extra data that's been brought on. How can we visualize that? How can we present that information to the operator to give them outcomes that are more actionable? And we'll look at intelligent insights as a method to do that. So you can't run before you can walk. So, but in the limits of the 10-minute sort of presentation, we're going to make some assumptions that the cameras need to be fit for purpose. They need to meet the operational requirements. They've got to give you a great picture irrespective of the weather and the lighting conditions. They've got to be reliable. They've got to work in the ecosystem of all the different manufacturers out there. And we've got two of the technology partners here today, Hanwha and Genetec. We've got to link into all the systems and also to have strong data security to make sure that the data we're putting onto networks is as secure as it can be. So if we take an initial example of video analytics, and I think it's important to say that with a lot of public space environments, you're using a camera that can pan, tilt and zoom. And you need to be able to have these benefits as the camera is panning and tilting as well. So in this example here, we're using one of our, if you're familiar with the Bosch names, it's a Mickey camera, but also can use this in the Autodome 7000. We've just highlighted a detection field. And as the person walks into that, we've pre-programmed a response to do something called intelligent tracking, which is to automatically follow that person. But you can do this manually as well. So an operator could click on a person or a vehicle, and the camera would automatically follow them while the operator gets on with another task. So if we take this further example, we've got a sort of different fields marked up in the complete range, the camera's pan tilt axis. So it could be an area prone to vandalism or drug exchange, for example. So we've got an example, somebody just picked something up that's been dropped off in a skip. The camera is tracking them, has taken over. We'll stop tracking as they get into the vehicle, and we'll wait for movement. And you'll see then that transition of the camera tracking them from the person and into the car afterwards. So how can we supplement that technology? So that's based on predefined rules which are inside the camera. But we also have the ability to use machine learning capabilities to use something called camera trainer to teach the camera more user-defined situations. If the end user wants to achieve something that's very specific to their site. So on the bottom right-hand side of that, it could be a smart parking application, for example, where we've got car park bay occupancy, teaching the camera to understand what a vacant bay looks like and what an occupied bay looks like as well. And then presenting that information to understand which parking areas are busy, which could be potentially used in a wider context of things to manage traffic to go to areas in a city where there are spaces there to try to reduce the number of circles a vehicle might make for looking for a relevant bay. So if we take another example of how we can teach the camera to look for something we're interested in this case, a stationary vehicle parked in a hard shoulder. And in this case, usually with the standard analytics, you need to see the history of the vehicle coming in and then stopping to flag it. But in that case, we went straight to a stationary vehicle and reported it as that without seeing the history of them going from that deceleration point. So ultimately presenting information to the operator to give them information on a potentially dangerous situation where a vehicle comes to a standstill in a hard shoulder area. If we take that to an additional stage, we can do something called forensic search, which is the ability to do a post-event search. So if we record all the metadata from the various cars and people and cycles, even if we haven't set up a live alarm in the first place, we can retrospectively search the database of all this different metadata criteria to narrow down the search options for the operator to review. So the example on the right-hand side, there's a line crossing an area, and we'll put a predefined time period within there. And then on the left-hand side, we can filter that to say give information about the speeds of vehicles we're looking at, the color of the vehicle, and that just filters down the database search, which means the operator is then viewing a shorter event list, which makes it much more easier to get to the relevant alerts. And we'll see an example of this in one of the joint sponsor videos later that Genetec are going to show us. So I also mentioned we've got talking about a new open camera platform. Our brand name for this is Intiox. So it's using the same Bosch technology and the analytics available in there, but is using a common and secure operating system provided by security and safety things. So this gives the ability to securely add software apps at a later date. And so system integrators can add apps from a download store from security and safety things, and developers can develop apps based on a common language. And the end result is to give more options and more data to the operator that's relevant for them. On the right-hand side, the example of using that for number plate recognition. But in this video here, a third-party developer has designed an app in coordination with that common platform based on face mask detection. And you can here see a bounding box of green around the person wearing the mask, and a bounding box of red for the person not wearing the mask as well. So it's providing extra data and giving the operator potential information, and sort of based on a way of developing that, which means third-party developers can go ahead to develop in that way, increasing innovation. So with all this extra data we're potentially making available to the operator, we're looking at different ways to make that more visual and present that in a dashboard, and we've called that Intelligent Insights, and we'll look at some of the applications or widgets that you can make available on the screen to visualize that data. So it could be an area fill level where you see the percentage of people in an area that's building up to a predefined capacity, or you could be using people counting to find a level, whether it's in a store or a building. And once that level of occupancy has been reached, you'll have a red traffic light signal and then green and amber below that to control the flow of people within the building. And on the right-hand side as well, the ability to have situational awareness provided in a map overview using the geolocation technology that you'll find in Bosch cameras to give a map overview. And you'll see an example here. So on the left-hand side is the map overview, and there are icons of the way that cars and bicycles and people are moving within that scene. It's taking some of the information from that thermal camera on the right-hand side at the top. And we're also presenting different data. So in the picture in the middle on the right-hand side where there's a desk, there's a person taking a box from one side just to mimic a counter being displayed on the amber signal to the left, which move from 5 to 6, and which will move to 7 as well once they pass that next box through that scene. And you can display that information in a number of ways. So this is effectively using the icons as opposed to the camera view. You've got that situational awareness map on the left-hand side to give the operator a good overview of what's happening. And then you'll see that box count on the top right-hand side, which is at 9 at amber at the moment, tick over to 10 and turn red because we've got a predefined limit. And we're all different icons, whether it's counting people at entrances, capacity or parking occupancy, and all that extra detail can be displayed in that sort of graphical way. So just to conclude, appreciate you taking your time out of the day to attend and to listen to that. So we looked at some of the analytics rules that you can present operators with relevant alerts. We introduced this new open platform protocol in Ptz Camera, which increases the pool of applications available to end users. And also with all this extra data, we're using intelligence insights to visualize that and to make outcomes more actionable for the operator. So thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to speak today. And if I hand back to David.
A big takeaway for me from that particular presentation by Carl is the interface, is that presentation, that dashboard as he called it, that the operators interface with regard to all this tech, because that's really important. As a person that works a lot with operators, particularly in the training room, those sort of features are so important. Now, what's happening out there with the technology, it's how it presents itself to the operator. So interesting stuff there from Carl. Moving on then, we're going to come to our final keynote speaker, if you like, who to some of you at least will be no stranger. But I'm going to introduce him properly, of course, because there may be many of you out there that haven't met him before. It's Mr. Tony Porter, who has recently ended his tenure as our UK surveillance camera, or England and Wales at least, our surveillance camera commissioner. and he was involved in the regulatory side of surveillance in this country. So with what we've had this morning, first of all, I should say, with what happened in the first session in terms of the behavioural sciences, the input from our industry colleagues, of course, so lots of stuff going on there, but nonetheless, an important part of the jigsaw is the regulatory side. So Tony joins us again. We're pleased to welcome him back. He's spoken at our events and many other events many times before over the years. He was appointed in that commissioner role from March 2014 and left it, as we've just said, at the end of 2020. His background, he's an intelligence specialist and is a retired senior police officer. His experience spans community and business engagement, international counter-terrorism and serious organised crime. He has a new role now, but no doubt all that regulatory knowledge stays with him, of course, as he's a chief privacy officer now for Callsight AI, beg your pardon, and Tony brings it says here, RegTech, which I'm not quite sure, I can imagine what that might mean, Tony, I'm sure you'll explain, into his new business's corporate armoury, as well as years of surveillance, operational and regulatory experience to the role. So again, we welcome you back, Tony. I understand you're with us with the technology that you've got available to you. So yes, we can see you, that's great. So again, as always, pleased to see you, and the floor is yours, my friend.
Well, thanks so much, David. Good to see you, and I'm sure there's many people listening that have been friends of mine going backwards over the years. I don't intend to focus on my current role quite so much because I don't see this as a commercial opportunity for me. I've heavily invested in the surveillance industry, and I continue to want to bring the learning that I've picked up from that to fora such as these. But I will top what I have to say by saying that 30 years in the police, I finished last 10 years in charge of national security counter-terrorism for the police, a spell as head of intelligence at Barclays Bank, and then the commissioner for overt surveillance in the England and Wales, has really given me a really solid backdrop, not just to what a smart surveillance operator needs to know and understand to do the function, but actually how to fold in what a regulator requires and how to protect your own organisation, whether or not you are a developer or one of the range of industries from development to integrator or consultant, right the way to end user. And one of the things I was thinking about before talking to you was, well, what is an operator? And it's not an easy question because the operator could well be the man or woman looking through the lens, operating the system. It could be the entity that's purchased the system and is operating it in totality. Or it could be a meld between the developer, a partner, or the operator. So the challenge around being a smart operator is quite broad, and I've given quite a bit of thought to what I want to say to this group. So I hope it's of use to you. In my period, certainly since being a commissioner, what I have seen is I've seen standards change. I have to say they've gone north in terms of certification, in terms of GDPR and the protection of the citizen in terms of the data. I've seen the emergence of human rights and data infosec security coming more into play, and of course swinging fines if you don't get it right. So it has been a very fast moving piece. We've also seen complexity of technology. It seems strange to say, but when I started in a regulatory role, analog CCTV was still de rigueur. It now no longer is. Of course, it's IP, it's algorithmic, it's big data, it's quantum computing, it's bloody complex. It really is. And I'll talk a little bit about my current experience. It's complex as well in terms of the trade-offs you guys have to make to do this lawfully. You have to balance privacy and security. Well, we know that. But you then have to balance security against data minimization and anonymization, pseudonymization, and all the complexities that are emerging out of current legislation. How do you do that? How do you manage those trade-offs and those privacy differentials? That's a real key issue I want to touch on. So what I intend to do is hopefully steer the professionals in the right direction. You will not have all the answers, at least from my perspective, around making sure your surveillance is smartly operated. But I think you'll have a roadmap, if nothing else. I will focus on RegTech, as David said, because I think the industry is more intent on creating new words and acronyms for what we do than actually explaining, I guess, the reality of what we do. And then finally, focus on the human intervener. I'm really sorry I missed the first two speakers. I think they were coming at the same issue from a different subject. And I sincerely hope that what I say either chimes with what they say or contradicts what they say, because at least it will generate debate. So, back in the day, I talked about a scenario at an airport, what could happen. And I imagined a terrorist walking through landside at the airport, carrying a rucksack filled with TNT explosive, and the sensor technology picked up that smell, alerted the video system management, not CCTV, as you'll note I've said. It alerts the cameras to switch to where the sensors are saying. The facial recognition identifies a face, cross-checks with a reference database, identifies a nominal on the database as a counter-terrorism suspect, alerts the firearms officers as a potential interdiction, and firearms can respond in 60 seconds and bring down a potential terrorist threat. Nobody can tell me that is a bad thing. It is a force for good, that kind of technology. Let's have it. I would never, in my regulatory role, have accepted that as a challenge. There are privacy issues that must be managed through, human rights issues and legal issues, but that is a force for good. But what it indicates is the intensity of video equipment that's coming out now that can spot you from kilometers, not just a few hundred meters, audio tech that can pick up sound, sensor tech smell, gait from artificial intelligence, how people walk, even sentiment analysis. And all of that is capable through big data and quantum computing to cross-check against those databases. So how are you going to manage that? Because at each and every level, you've got a potential infraction of human rights and civil liberties, and Big Brother watch on your case saying you shouldn't be doing this. Well, let me talk about the tiger traps for the smart operator that we know exist. So your operational requirement, you make sure that that's accurate. And I would urge you to go to the Passport to Compliance on the Surveillance Commission's website. Data protection impact assessments, you know that. What are your lawful grounds? What's your lawful processing grounds? I'm not going to use this platform to go through that. But I would urge any of you, particularly the operators and managers, to know those off pat, because they link into everything else. How you comprise your watch lists for artificial intelligence, how you ensure that your legitimacy, whether it's common law statute, PSED. And then there's a range of documentation that feels almost impossible to grab hold of. Appropriate policy documents, legitimate impact assessments, human right impact assessments. What else is there? Threat and risk impact assessments for the police. It is a dog's dinner. But let's not forget, underpinning all of this is the role of the human intervener. And I believe we've got some super recognizers in the audience. I think your hairs on the back of your neck will stand up. But these people are absolutely crucial to harnessing this technology. The second tiger trap for any operator, and in this sphere I'm looking at the big operator who's deploying, make sure that you buy your kit that's secure by design, privacy by design, and human rights by design. Now, we know that under Recital 78 of the GDPR, I think Article 72 of the Data Protection Act, that is a requirement. But here's a question for you operators that want to be smart. How do you know if your kit matches that standard? And the answer is, I have to tell you, you don't. There's no standard. There's no actually recognized standard for you to hit that. And the ground is so varied, it feels almost impossible to achieve it. And I often said that there are areas where you can drive a coach and horses through GDPR, and I don't think that's a good thing for the potential smart operator. So in my years working with Global MSC Takeaway, I've always wanted to give a little of something back. And the first takeaway I'd like to give to people in the audience today, if you're in a position where you're trying to make sure your smart operator is smart, is to keep cognizance of these reg techs, the regulation on technology. You have to hunt them down. People call them frameworks, but actually I don't really think they are, but there's some really strong work out there. And the three I pull out for you today are the European Artificial Intelligence Framework, actually the Information Commissioner's AI Framework, and the AI Audit document that also emerges from that, that body. You take those three together, and I would also mix in the UN Guiding Principles for business, the human rights for business. And actually, you can draw out of there the guidance that you need to make sure that your smart operator isn't being stupid. You do that by, I'll tell you, there are 433 measures within that piece of work, and I'm going to draw on some of the more important stuff. And when I say that there's no roadmap, there's no framework, there isn't. I made my own framework working for Coresight, but it's extremely important because a lot of the issues, particularly for the human intervener, are writ large within there, and it actually tells you what to do and how to do it. You just need the effort and commitment to do it. So the sorts of things, check that your system isn't biased in terms of privacy by design against children or vulnerable people. Check that it's human rights by design in terms of analysis of the same vulnerable groups that are outlined. Does your procurement team cross-check against the developer's ethical statement? Because you should, and the developer also ought to be telling you what their ethical position is. Has your developer, or if you're a developer, have you identified your UN salient rights? And this sounds very fanciful, but believe me, if you haven't, you can't get out of the gate. And you will find over the next 12 months that the purchasing requirements will be directing you in that area. And also just imagine the reassurance you would give to potential customers if you can say, well, actually, this is what we do, this is how we do it, and this is how we embed it. So I suppose the message from this, depending what type of operator you are, is developers explain, operators and procurers of that kit ask, what does it do? What are the principles? Do you have a high-level explanation of how the human rights is addressed and how you can manage the process? And is there a high-level technical explanation in case you need that, should you be moving to, let's say, a court of law or something more heinous than that? So a smart surveillance operator ensures that the argument there is an even and fair fight between the proponents of privacy versus the proponents of security, because it is a trade-off. You're not going to get it right, but your obligation is to account for the trade-off that you make. That's really the second or third takeaway I'd like people to walk out. In my regulatory days, I intervened in the use of some AI surveillance, the Trafford Centre in Manchester, King's Cross in London, drones hovering over a courting couple in Derbyshire breaching COVID. I'm not talking out of turn. I didn't think that was smart surveillance operations. I think it fell down in terms of proportionality, transparency, legitimacy aim, the training of the human interveners, the accuracy of what the kit was trying to do. And I think that's a position that we must all learn from and make sure that our operators don't fall foul of it. So how do we look towards doing that? A phrase I've often used is that I think the human intervener is a sentinel in the mist. They're trying to ensure that they use this design technology, privacy, secure, and human rights, as I've said, in a way that's legitimate. But who helps them look through the mist? How do they do that? How do they achieve that? So the three documents I've talked about, the frameworks, the EU, the AI by the ICO, if you've got some commitment, you can pull out the things that are an absolute must, and I'm going to read them through. Leaders, data scientists, and business owners need to play an active role in ensuring AI is human-friendly, not that the humans are computer-friendly. That's absolutely critical. It should not blindly follow an inference of likelihood. Facial recognition is, in fact, if you like, facial likelihood or a facial guess, that means the human intervener needs support. That person needs to be active and have authority and competence. They can't have that without training. They can't have that unless they know what the privacy differentials and the trade-offs are between security and privacy. Because it's quite possible to actually not data minimize because what you're doing is increasing accuracy. Well, be aware of that as a human intervener and be bold, because I'm actually frankly fed up of I suppose the more vocal people, the people that argue that this is chilling for society, misrepresenting the work that you do and the work that surveillance outfits do. And it needs to, I'll be bold, it needs to stop. Design front-end interface so that the AI is human-friendly. So there's a whole bunch of stuff there, and I could have talked at length about most of the elements, but I think you get what I'm saying, is that the time has come almost to do a Steve Jobs, where the intelligent operator is demanding from the developer the intuitive, the user-friendly process to enable them to do the job. In the 3 months I've been working with data scientists, making sure they're regulatory compliant, I have jumped into algorithm build in a way I would never have imagined. But actually, how fascinating, shutting the scientists up and saying, I don't care about your differential and your tangents and your cosines and the difference between probability and rate and ratio. I don't care about that. I want to know in a human language what that means and what I can defend when I do this. And actually, humans and tech people need to speak human language. So there's a few powerful messages there. Certainly the 3 frameworks I do urge you to follow. Focusing on the human intervener if you want your smart operators to be smart. And I do applaud MSC Global for advancing this as a platform for debate. The debate about surveillance has been going on for centuries. It involves a potpourri of human rights issues. I don't like reading when I talk to this group, but there's some key message I do want to send out before I sign off. New surveillance is delivering something big. Something's occurring in a society that we haven't yet defined. The correlations, connections to big data, multifaceted surveillance platforms that can do amazing things that need to be controlled. The reality is that private organizations actually, I would argue, now have more power than the state, and they need to be more guarded in how they release that power if the rest of us are going to be able to deploy surveillance in a way that is acceptable to the general public. Ethics, whether you're an operator or a developer, is crucial. Do you know what your ethical principles are? Do you know what your salient human rights are out of the 32? Have you identified those that impact on your surveillance proposition? So, back to the airport. It's insightful, thought-provoking, I think a little bit scary what this kit does. It recognises the value of new and advancing technology, but underscores that society doesn't want to throw away its hard-won freedoms on the altar of the microchip. There's a guy called Gary T. Marks who is a great writer on surveillance, and he said, surveillance is neither good or bad, but context and deportment make it so. Your human intervener has never been more important. Invest in that person, whoever you are, on whichever spectrum from surveillance you come from. David, that's it. I hope it was useful. A tour de force of some of the issues.
Thank you, Tony. Yes, absolutely right. I can still sense that passion
Yes.
and that enthusiasm that you always had and still clearly have. And we thank you for that. And very robust and candid points you made there. And I made a few notes myself. Maybe we can discuss those a bit further coming up in our panel. And clearly, the scientists also that are with us today that you didn't have the pleasure of hearing earlier on, but no doubt when we come together to that panel, there's an opportunity for you to all to meet and maybe share some thoughts between you along what you've been saying. So that's good stuff there. Thank you much indeed. And don't forget, everybody out there, the chat pane is available to you. Do fire those questions into you. The super recognisers out there that may be listening to all this, anybody with a responsibility to procuring systems, managing systems, and indeed our cherished operators in the control rooms as well. And I was interested in Tony's twist on the word operator, really, in terms of he broadened it out in terms of being smart operators in a very wider sense. If you are responsible for procuring and implementing and managing surveillance technology, as opposed to just being that very important cog in the wheel, the human operator in a security control room. So all good stuff. Okay, we're going to go into a short piece of video now, and it's a collaborative video put together by our group of sponsors for this event, and we're thankful to them for that. So Genetec and Bosch and Hanwha Techwin have got together. It's about a 5-minute video, and it's going to be led by Nick Smith, who is the regional sales manager in the UK and Ireland of Genetec. And we'll leave you with that, and then we'll see you again in a very short period of time for that question and answer panel where you've got time to explore anything you want to share and debate and challenge from today's content. Nick, you're there waiting. Over to you, Mo.
Hi, David.
Hi there.
Hi, how you doing? Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Firstly, I'd like to thank you all for joining us for this demonstration, which is going to follow the smart theme of today's event. So I'll be providing a very short demonstration, which is going to highlight how the technology that has been previously presented by both Bosch, how that can be utilised within the Genetec Security Centre platform to provide operators within a control room environment a more efficient, smarter way to investigate incidents, to find footage and evidence when using video analytics and specifically the metadata associated. So first of all, let's take a look at a demonstration around Bosch analytics and specifically the forensic search functionality that's contained within that. So one of the key bits I think it's worth knowing about Bosch is they actually are a platinum technology partner. What does this mean? This essentially means that we take advantage when we develop the integration into Bosch technology. We take advantage of all the technology that's within those cameras. So all the analytic events we support natively. So when you are installing or you're utilizing a Bosch IVA camera, it means that we can receive those live events. But more importantly, when we're looking at a control room environment, it's taken advantage of the metadata. So that data that's held against those video events to allow us to retrospectively search for objects of interest, anything of interest within multiple different cameras to find exactly what we need efficiently and quickly. Yeah, so if we can get the video on, please. Okay, so what you're seeing here is essentially what the operator would do when they're using a Bosch camera and they're searching for video. So this is the Genetec Security Centre platform. The operator would select the cameras, the Bosch cameras that they want to be able to run a search on. They then set the parameters for that search. So we pick up all of the forensic search rules, and you can apply one or as many of those rules to the video as possible as you like, and then you select the duration, the time period you want to search. This will then present the operator with a list of results. And then the operator can flick through those results to define, which of those search results will actually give them the evidence they need. Once they've defined that evidence, they found the footage they need, they can then tag that through bookmarks, add it to an incident, or send it to Genetec clearance for sharing with somebody else. If we now take this a step further and we make it a bit more complex, here what we're actually doing is we're setting a number of different rules to search across numerous different cameras based on vehicle events. And instead of then presenting the footage to an operator, what we're actually going to do is we're going to create something called a dashboard. So within the Genetec platform, we can create user-definable dashboards. And this particular dashboard is going to be very much focused on traffic monitoring. So by using Bosch Analytics, by mining that forensic search, what we've got here is we're creating a dashboard that will give an operator a live view, a real-time view of what is going on within that environment. So here we can see the amount of events, which way the vehicles have gone, if they're cars, buses, pedestrians. So I think it's key to mention again that Bosch are a platinum technology partner, that we do bring in those live events in real time with the bounding boxes, but more importantly, the real power is around the forensic search, where we can really define what we want to find. And this could be used for people counting, it could be for vehicle object classification based on different filters, color, size, direction, just to really allow us to mine that data really quickly and easily to really find the areas of interest. So if we now take a look at the Hanwha solution, so here we're looking at cameras that are the WiseNet, Hanwha WiseNet AI-enabled cameras. And here we've selected a number of different cameras, so we've selected all the cameras, and we're going to search for a person based on, so we're searching for a male based on the top half of their body having dark clothing, in this case blue or black, and the bottom half being blue, black or grey. So again, the operator is presented with the results. They can flick through the results, have a look at the snapshots till they get to the particular point where they think they found the subject of interest. You can then verify that by zooming in. And again, that video can then be bookmarked. It can be added to an incident or sent to Genetec clearance for sharing with a third party. We're now going to look for a vehicle. So we're going to look for a car, a grey car, and essentially we're looking for something, a grey car that's exiting this drive. So again, the operator very easily, just based on those filters that they've defined in there and run the search, will be given the snapshots, and they can very easily then find that footage that shows that vehicle leaving that driveway. So to make this relevant to the current situation we all find ourselves in, we're going to run another rule, and this particular rule is going to it's going to give us results of people who are not wearing face masks. So again, we specify the time range, the cameras we want to look for, and then ultimately the operator is presented with the results of persons not wearing a face mask. So let's take it the other way. Let's look for people that are wearing face masks. Again, we've got two results here. We can then play back the footage of interest just to verify that it is the person we're looking for, to verify that it is what we've applied, and we can see clearly there that it's detected that we have got somebody there wearing a face mask. So this is obviously retrospective searching through the video, but again, we can bring those results into dashboards, and these are completely configurable, and you can bring anything in there. So here we have total footfall, we have how many people have been wearing a mask, how many people haven't been wearing a mask, and this is updated in real time. So it's about giving a snapshot, giving those insights to the operators in control room to stop them from becoming overwhelmed with data. So again, Hanwha at TechWin, they're a platinum technology partner for Genetec, which again means we support all of their analytics natively. And again, we've got a whole range of analytics, including demographics, classification, object searching, etc., that just to make the control room a far smarter and a more effective control room. And that is my bit done, David. Over to you.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Nick. That's good.
You're welcome.
Good. Well done. Okay. Welcome back, everybody. James, if you come and join us up here. We're about to go into the Q&A panel that is on your agenda. And so to the platform, I want to bring James back, as you can see. We're also joined by Derek Maltby, who you were introduced to very first thing on the seminar. And of course, on a virtual level, we're going to be joined by Craig Donald, who we heard from very first of all this morning, and indeed Tony Porter more recently. In addition to that, with the global theme in mind, we're going to also welcome back to our seminar a gentleman who's been with us on more than one occasion. We welcome him back again from Canada. This is Christian Moran, who may well be familiar to some of you from Genetec. He's the Vice President of Integrations and Cloud Solutions at Genetec. And his resume very simply reads that he's the lead strategist for cloud services at Genetec. And with over 18 years of experience in IT, telecommunications and physical security industries, Christian has a keen ability to anticipate technological trends, so his insights are going to be very useful in this occasion, and drive meaningful organisational growth. His executive leadership continues to support the strategic direction and the success of Genetec. So welcome, I think, three gentlemen there. Yeah, you're all with me. And if I may start to ask, Craig, have you been able to follow the whole programme since you joined us at the very beginning?
Yes, I have.
Oh, good. So you've had a chance to listen to James's presentation and of course, more latterly, Tony's too. That's great. Because I know... Tony, were you able to follow? You didn't hear the previous speakers, did you? You weren't able to join us. Okay.
I wasn't, unfortunately, no.
Because you're surrounded by these scientists, of course, that you referred to. So, but it's interesting to actually to bring, if I may say so, Craig Donald and James Ferryman together, who were kind of on the same page in many ways, but come at it from different perspectives, from the behavioural side of things. And one thing that did strike me, and I'm going to refer to it straight away, if I may, and take us into this discussion, is this idea of recognising intent, James, that you touched on. And I just wonder, you heard this, Craig, from your perspective, from a behavioural science point of view and the nuanced behaviours of individuals, what do you make of that in terms of technology being able to recognise intent, if I've read your,
absolutely.
Your words correctly?
That's right.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think intent is a really important part of the diagnosis of a crime situation. And generally there's pre-warning that a crime is going to happen. And the way I mentioned the reconnaissance, the way people are looking at it, what are they looking at, where are they positioned relative to something else, are all important aspects. One thing that I did like about that is it was reflecting a person of interest and it was reflecting a potential target at the same time. So we have a lot of situations, for example, where people are standing outside a hotel or a railway station and somebody runs up and grabs their cell phone out of their hand, jumps into a car and drives off. And I don't know whether that's common around the UK or not, but certainly we have a big problem like that. So if you are alerted by an AI technology, I'm not entirely sure whether we're there yet, you're alerted to the fact that there's a potential target for a cell phone snatcher, and you alerted that there's a particular vehicle based on number plate recognition or face recognition of a person who has been linked to that kind of thing before, then there's a good chance that you can marry those two. But then we might get into issues that Tony is concerned about.
Yeah, absolutely. But James, I want to give you the right to it because I'm obviously probing that line.
I mean, and Craig touched on it with a great example, actually. I hadn't really thought of that example exactly, but this idea that, I mean, in the UK in particular, I think we have problems with people on scooters, particularly in London. I've seen cases of, people driving down the street, perhaps in groups, actually. There's even group behaviour, group dynamics involved in, 2 or 3 scooters together, they're cooperating. But, it's about understanding the cues involved. So, as you said, Craig, I mean, have they done something similar before? I mean, are these scooters or drivers linked to these scooters, are they congregating in areas and then suddenly speeding down roads, stopping, obviously instantaneously while they grab something like a mobile phone and then shooting off, and then the whole process repeats itself? And if you can actually recognise that and encode that in a contextualised way, in a behavioural model, then you have certainly a good opportunity there to try to predict that behaviour, try to recognise that intent before, or even preceding, ideally, of course, before that event actually starts to happen. So I think that's what we're trying to do. I mean, if we can do that robustly, then that would be great.
Interesting. Tony, for yourself, if I can just summarise very quickly, the content that you sadly missed was from Craig Donald, Dr. Craig Donald, who is from Joburg, South Africa, and I've had the privilege of listening and working with some of his material over the last 20 years in my role within the operator environment, the control environment. And he was talking very much about the behavioural. He's an organisational psychologist, so very much around. And I remember originally he was talking about the development of an operator working in the casinos of South Africa and the diamond mines, and the really nuanced behaviour of individuals where AI is very object-driven, whereas a human is very much, obviously, far more intellectually nuanced. So his presentation was very much around that, and lots of demonstration around body language, which, if he's looking at me now, he'll have all sorts of thoughts about what I'm feeling and thinking. Professor James Ferryman, you just heard talking there, he's a lead at computational science and visualization, computerization at Reading University. So they come at a similar sort of journey, but from different angles. So what would your comments be to 2 eminent scientists with us today in relation to what you've just been talking about?
I think both arguments extremely interesting. Dealing with the behavioural science in the first instance, at the moment, it feels a lot easier to fold that into the regulatory framework. Most of the rules and the ethics that surround this say that there must be a human intervener. If there's going to be a legal impact, there needs to be a recognition that there is a human sort of element to it. And particularly if that person has had training and is recognizing those nuances, then that person is accountable. So that is easier to fold in than predictive technology or suggested technology. But that's not to say that the latter technology is verboten, because I think Craig went on to talk about secondary triggers or even primary triggers that could very easily be used as the justification, the legitimacy for enabling a second tier of technological assessment. So I think it's fascinating. I'm fully supportive of both thrusts. Finally, if anybody was looking to use it, I would come out with the usual scenarios of be careful about accuracy, be careful about fairness, be careful that you can justify the use of that technology that is predictive. But that does not in any way, shape or form rule out these most fantastic advances in technology.
Yes, it is. It's how we blend it, isn't it? It's not denying the technology; it's embracing it and blending it with human requirements, regulatory requirements. I want to bring in Christian Moran now. Welcome back, Christian.
Thanks for having me.
I hope, and I guess you're over in Canada, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, did you have the pleasure of being able to join us for the whole seminar?
No, unfortunately, I could not. I had other meetings this morning that...
Okay. I was going to ask you a question from a sort of an industry perspective, really, on all this, in terms of, I mean, your colleagues have done a great job in helping us understand some of the product development that's going on out there, the way that they can help us in a range of different ways with product at the sharp end and indeed product in the human interface with it all. So where do you, from a developing a smart operator perspective, being in the wider context that Tony Porter talked about, the operator being the entity that's considering or indeed going to use it, or indeed the actual human operator inside a control room, where do you see it going? What are you doing to help operators and operational entities become smarter with what they're trying to achieve?
Yeah, I was listening to the what was said just prior to this, and I think it's the first image that popped into my mind was the movie The Minority Report, right? And I think that we're very far from being there, and we have to basically leverage and develop these technologies in a responsible manner so that we don't end up in that situation. I think Tony kind of hinted at the fact that, these technologies are great to help do a lot of the heavy lifting, allow to detect patterns that are sometimes very difficult or time-consuming for a human being to do, and then present pre-chewed information that's more easy to digest to a human being that will actually be making a proper judgment call. So I think it's important to kind of see how these technologies can be used. I'm familiar with the project that we were doing with ANPR in the United States, where we were detecting drug convoys. Right, so similar pattern to the scooter incident, where you have convoys of vehicles that are basically smuggling large quantities of drugs. There's some vehicles in there, so you can actually detect these convoys or these patterns reoccurring. But you need to put a human into, right? Because AI, as we had joked about last time, doesn't exist, right? It's no such thing as proper artificial intelligence. But they're great techniques for machine learning, deep learning, pattern recognition that helps do a lot of the heavy lifting for human beings.
Yeah, okay, it's interesting stuff. Yeah, thank you for that. Great, so always good to have your insight in that. I'm going to go to an audience question in just a moment, but Derek, so I'm not going to ignore you, but I do want to bring in an audience question. And perhaps before I do that, it's on the screen in front of me, just to give some context for the international audience that we enjoy today. Many of you may well have seen it anyway, because I think it has reached a global audience, but we had some tragic events in the UK in very recent days over the last week. sparked by a horrendous murder of a 30-year-old lady, not least of which the perpetrator of that horrendous crime is a serving police officer. Which led to a great groundswell of emotion and feeling from particularly women of all ages who feel very aggrieved at the violence that they potentially face and do face in real life as they go about their normal everyday lives, which led to a gathering, a rather large gathering in London, an area called Clapham in South London, which in current coronavirus pandemic context was deemed to be an unlawful gathering, which required some sensitive management, but things did get a little bit out of control to an extent where people took action that was necessary, but some people believe it was indeed disproportionate. And you may well have seen the graphic pictures that were on our UK media and no doubt on international media too. I say this because the question comes from that context, and it's from Peter Spindler, who, Peter, thank you for your question, and we know you from a previous speaker at one of our live seminars in Bristol. And for the audience, Peter is a former senior police officer. He's also a lead on safeguarding issues, and is an expert, if I may say that, Peter, in that sphere of work. So his question to the panel is, given the appalling incidents in Clapham, what additional support and initiatives do the panel think that this sector, our security sector, our surveillance sector in particular, should offer government and law enforcement as they develop strategies to combat violence against women and girls? So again, that's quite it's a big question, but it's a big issue right here and now, and no doubt, not just in the UK, this will resonate across other parts of the globe. So with that in mind, perhaps I'm going to go to Tony Porter now. As a former senior police officer yourself, Tony, no doubt you're up to speed with at least what's in the media, maybe other strands of information as well. What are your thoughts on Peter's question about what can we do in this sector as we go forward to try and combat violence against women and girls?
It's a great question. I've been thinking for the last 2 or 3 days, but what can we do? It's tricky, but in terms, and in direct answer to Peter, and hi Peter, by the way, I think we are talking about some form of database for individuals, let's face it, who are predominantly men, 99.9% men, who are guilty or suspected or strong intelligence of what? Sexual harassment, sexual crimes, control crimes. So, and I've heard somewhere in the region of 50,000 banded around. I'm not sure whether or not, given the current climate, the government couldn't talk about saying that in unique and specific circumstances, we recognise that there are certain people that are in certain areas, and we will use face recognition cameras. Whether it's live or historic is one issue. The latter would be less invasive, so perhaps less politically dynamite than others. In areas where women feel vulnerable, so you're talking subways, you're talking large parks and gardens, cut-throughs from large places to residential areas, and actually saying that this is a society that is responding to the fear of women in an intractable problem. We will have a database of those men who are suspected. Now, it's challenging, it's cutting edge, but this is a problem that's been going on for millennia. So something has to emerge that is sensitive, and this may be an answer.
Yeah, it's a thought. Again, it's that, that balance between safety and security and, and human rights, if you like, and even the group that are directly affected by this, how they would cherish the fact that, maybe the extent to which surveillance might play a part in their future safety. Going to Craig, if I may, from a bit, obviously, with your expertise around the behavioural science side, what are your thoughts on this question from Peter?
Well, I come from a society where we've got some of the worst gender-based violence probably in the world. And I've got two daughters who are older. One is studying at university, and she goes through to do her research late at night and comes back. So it's something that certainly I'm very conscious of. I think in the UK, and I don't want to disrespect anybody here, I think it's a tragic incident. But you are very lucky in some senses that it's generally a safe society, There are areas where it's not, and this was an instance where it wasn't. And you had a person, from what I understand, as a policeman who wouldn't have been on the list of Tony's potential issues in terms of face recognition or whatever. Ideally, if you have something on an app, perhaps if a woman can request surveillance in an area, if there are cameras on a dedicated basis, on a request basis, to protect her, I think you've got to be street smart as much as possible. And my daughters wouldn't walk around on the streets outside my house late at night. I wouldn't walk around in the streets outside my house. But I think you've got to conscientize people around as a support network, men and women in society, just keeping an eye out for potential things that can happen, and if necessary, making a call, doing something about it as much as possible. You can't put surveillance on everybody all the time. And how we prevented that particular incident, or how you would have prevented that incident, I really don't have a solution for somebody walking through an area of parkland or down a normal suburban road and being attacked. I'm not quite sure how you actually address that, unless the mobilization of people to the extent to which it's happened has sent a message to society and to people who might even think about it that it's not a good idea to do this.
Yeah, it is. As you say, I think you articulate very well that the difficulties and the challenges, where we want to help and we look for the, not necessarily solutions, but sort of how we can contribute to the whole agenda around this. From a computational vision point of view, where do you see this going, James?
Well, also, I've been thinking about this, as I'm sure many people too, and of course I look at this also from a technology perspective. And thinking, for example, enhanced surveillance. I mean, I agree in principle, of course, we can't survey people all the time. But what about a situation where we can give enhanced powers to authorities and law enforcement to access data as and when needed? Now, what I mean by that is that this is a tragic incident, a tragic case. There's been a murder. This is very serious, of course. But also, contextually around it, there's an awful lot, and I don't have the statistics to hand, but there's a lot of flashes, a lot of other incidents that are going on. I mean, I've heard stories in the last few days of women who have reported incidents, and they apparently haven't been really followed up seriously. That's not for me to judge. But, where there is something that's been reported as being unusual, suspicious, someone's been followed, how can we exploit the technology that we have today and the data that we have in an enhanced way that can help to address some of these issues? I mean, for example, telephony data, mobile phone data, going as far as maybe looking at CCTV images and using face recognition. I'm not saying do it all the time, but in a proportionate way when there's a need, when there's I'm sure Tony will say more about this as well, but when it's believed that there was a real potential crime that may have occurred or will occur or has occurred, when can that data be used and how can it be used in a way that can catch these or apprehend these offenders? I'm sure this technology can support, and obviously, murders is not what we want, of course, but how can technology support the detection of these crimes which inadvertently have happened, of course. I mean, I hear a lot of crimes of potentially, sexual harassment and all these kind of things have occurred. How can that be stopped? How can technology support that? And how can access to data in a proportionate way? I know there's a lot of the jurisdictions around the legal aspects and so on around this and the ethics that has to be debated. Maybe this is the time now where a serious discussion can take place about that and allow access in an agreed way to data. And, again, the people who, all of us can play a role in this as well, and the technology companies as well, in enabling access to data as and when needed. we can enable, we have location-based services on our mobile phones, and I'm sure a lot more can be done where we can proactively also enable such technology and location-based data to be shared through consent. So there's no single answer to this. Technology companies need to play a part, the authorities need to play a part. How can we exploit the data that we have and provide access to that data, but again in a proportionate way and in a legal way?
And I suspect then perhaps maybe even with your work, I know there's plenty of things going on at the moment within the Home Office, but clearly that may be another conversation you could well be engaged in going forward then, as they look for, you know, technical solutions to a social issue.
Absolutely, and I strongly believe we have a lot of great technology in place and data that is potentially very, very useful in preventing these kind of crimes taking place. How can we come together as a community, as a set of scientists, as a as basically all the stakeholders involved in this process? How can we come together to better exploit this kind of data and actually prevent these crimes taking place?
Okay, it's interesting. I want to bring Derek Maltby in just a moment, but that nice little segue link there from James Ferryman to you then, Christian, in terms of the technology companies and what they can do to perhaps participate in this process of you know, specific access to data sets in relation to particular crime types and victim types. What are your thoughts on that?
So Tony mentioned that, you know, when we're looking at it forensically, after the fact it happened, it's much easier of a problem to address. Hence, we're not in the prevention department. And I would say the bigger problem that we have is that the technology is generally there. Is how can we use it responsibly? How can we use it without becoming a surveillance state? How can we not become what we do not want to become to prevent these situations from happening? And, you know, far too little technology companies today actually take the appropriate time to put proper safeguards within their platforms to prevent unethical or unprofessional use of these tools and this technology. There's many things that can be done. We just have to avoid falling into the pitfall of mass surveillance everywhere all the time.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, great. I mean, and Derek, you and I mean, coming from our perspective, we engage with operational staff an awful lot, don't we? And on a day-to-day level, what are your thoughts on this? A big question in relation to a big issue right now.
Well, I've thought about it in the same way as others, and of course, CCTV, public space surveillance as we would know it, is not a statutory service in this country. So the responsibility sits generally with local authorities. In a few instances, such as Dyfed Powys, the Police and Crime Commissioner, David Llewellyn, has taken that responsibility because CCTV in towns and villages was being turned off as being unaffordable. And in times of austerity, what are the things that get cut? Now, in the early 90s, I've been involved in CCTV for over 30 years. In the early 90s, there was Home Office initiatives for funding, and that was followed up by compliance and regulation about 15 or 20 years later. So they thought, let's throw money at the problem, let's buy some cameras, make people feel safe. Now, what's interesting today is that because of this groundswell of opinion and people, ladies, women, girls feeling unsafe, the government or somebody has said, we will invest in more CCTV. We will also consider putting police officers in clubs, nightclubs, bars, etc. Now, having been a policeman, I have a view on that, but I don't need to go into it. But CCTV is important. We've devalued that over the last few years because it was analog systems that were funded by the central government. Local authority continued to pay the annual ongoing revenue costs. But when money got tight, they started to reduce their operator cover. They cut their cameras. They didn't want to pay the transmission revenue costs. And gradually, we've eroded that trust and the benefit of the camera systems that were invested in all those years ago. And it's going to take a brave authority to say this isn't a statutory service when libraries are closing or when other statutory services are losing their funding, but we're not making CCTV statutory. And perhaps for those worldwide that don't know, you'd expect shoplifting and pickpocketing in Oxford Street in London. a crime, and I used to watch the documentaries on the CCTV and the squads that would go out and catch the pickpockets who would work in gangs. But that CCTV was removed 2 or 3 years ago because nobody could afford to fund it. The Met Police said it's not our responsibility. Westminster Council said it's not our responsibility. So that fell through the gaps. And there's 32 or more London boroughs saying, well, actually, if you fund it, Mr. Metropolitan Police, we want some funding too. So I think until central government say we will contribute to the role and funding of CCTV, it will always be down to local issues. And how come I can deal with local towns in Devon? They've got better surveillance than some cities have because of different political agendas. And that's a sad thing. Central government need to take responsibility, and maybe this is a watershed moment that they say, you're right, we've got that surveillance camera commissioner, we need to get some sort of organisation to equally divide this funding, and it shouldn't be just local taxpayers that fund it.
Okay, so from a government point of view then, in terms of the strategy going forward in relation perhaps to violence against women and girls, that if CCTV is going to play a fundamental part in the solution, or going forward, then more funding, more central funding needs to be considered.
That's right. And as Tony said, I thought earlier, facial recognition, people would generally say, we don't want facial recognition. I want my rights and my liberties. I don't want to be tracked. But there's this fine dividing line. And providing there are safeguards in place, perhaps we would accept it. And talking to James earlier, he's been involved in Home Office trials, and I thought it would be useful for you to explain what you've been involved with facial recognition at airports. It reduced the queue for passport control. If we were willing to tick a box to say, let me through quickly because I'm willing to be recognised by my face, who wouldn't accept that? So where is that dividing line? Where are the rules? And it would be interesting to see what is coming in the future that we could use this technology.
It's about that context, isn't it? Which is used. James, sorry.
I just have one comment about, make a very important point about this, the rollout of CCTV and the investment, from government down. One important word I want to use, though, is standardisation. So it would be no good to suddenly say, well, here's the investment, go off and go buy your kit, basically, and then deploy it. There has to be a level of standardisation in this effort, because at the end of the day, today, I'm sure many are aware, there are huge issues around access to CCTV footage. Half the CCTV cameras currently in existence today are privately owned, half for local authorities, and when a crime has been committed, it can be hugely burdensome to actually go and extract images from archive material from recorders and so on, and actually then to even decode the imagery and use it in a useful way is still another question still. So there has to be standardisation, and if we can actually get to a point where we can standardise what is actually installed, and to guarantee certain levels of quality and so on, it also will make the access to that data better as well, as and when legislation or other factors come into play, and the ethics and the legal aspects and so on, when it's permissible to do so. So that's hugely important, I think. I think we should stress that.
Okay, thank you for that. Before we leave this topic panel, any other comments that anybody wants to come back with? Thank you for your input so far. Anybody else want to finish off at all?
David, if I can...
Yeah, Craig, please.
One of the things that we have typically is people providing apps which effectively have a panic button in them. And people press the panic button and then notify surrounding security people or that you contracted to, who would then respond to that panic button. The problem is that you can't put cameras everywhere, but the cell phone itself can be a camera as well. So if you pushed a panic button, you actually had the camera on your cell phone surrounding you and looking, and there's a source or a body who now accepts that video and responds in some way, that kind of thing may be a feasibility. It has lots of complications to it. But it's certainly something in our society that people have. They have literally a mobile panic button on their phone. So you get a response of some kind to that.
Yeah, absolutely. It is we were talking offset, weren't we, about the different, the applications and the use of the mobile phone in this context. Yeah, it's good. Okay, I'm very conscious, of course, that we are very rapidly edging towards 3:30.
Can I just say, David, because the cat's just walked across Christian's desk and you missed that. But can I bring Christian in, perhaps? Because what Craig has just said about sending video by your smartphone to a central point, the police allow that. But I think, Christian, you could perhaps expand on that, because I've seen that demonstrated at your demo room once, and it's such a useful tool, I think. But perhaps for those that aren't aware, you could explain something about that.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, a lot of the technology tools that, exist today, right? It's how you glue them together, right? So streaming video from a mobile phone to a security operations center is feasible. And we've had situations, I know, on university campuses. They've for exactly that type of scenario for the safety of women. Women could basically, with an app, say, I want to be virtually escorted back to my dorm, and then they would have paths that would be surveilled along the way to basically give them this extra level of security. I think what's very important, specifically in these situations like that, where I'm coming from, is like, how can this be actually usable? How can the individual under duress trigger the panic button? How can the individual under duress actually position the camera in such a way that it's actually usable and whatnot? So it doesn't mean that the camera is there, that it's usable. So we also have to think about the use case and how it could be used, and if it would make any impact or not. So that's probably the biggest concern I would have with that specific example.
I think some research opportunities there.
I don't know whether you heard that, Christian, but he's talking about some research opportunities arising there. So maybe, again, I think one of the words I picked up during the day was collaboration, and the opportunity to collaborate between the different sciences, the industry, and the end users. And it was a project that I got involved with many years ago with yourself when in your earlier part of your academic career, in terms of looking at this collaboration between industry, between experts, and between end users. And here we are today, 20 years on, and still having these conversations. Right. But let's hope then out of even out of this little networking group we have here with our panel, there may be opportunities to get our heads together and look forward, and indeed, not just Peter's question, but looking at this whole agenda of how can we make more valuable use of technology, and particularly when it comes to the operational side and developing more smart operations and indeed human operators as we go forward. Now, we have reached that time in our programme, which is time to call it to a close. So, if I may, I thank the panel much indeed for your contributions there. I'm going to go into my closing remarks and bring our online event to a close, but don't run away just yet, because I just want to say a big thank you to all of you who, as I said at the outset, have taken time out of your agendas to join us today, to spend 2.5 hours with us, and we really thank you for that. And we hope, of course, that you really have had some really great value out of today. We've had some fantastic content, some really fascinating insights into some really quite deep areas of how we might deploy and use surveillance technology. So again, thanks for the questions that have come through. If there's anything that you else want to ask, we will try to pick those up once the event has ended, and we can always deal with those, and obviously access to our experts beyond the time we have here in the studio. And it's only right, of course, that I do say, as I have before, a really big thank you to all the panel, all the experts that have given their time today to be able to make this content relevant and realistic, and really important for you to have an insight with. So thank you, Craig and James, Tony, Christian, of course, from Canada, from Genetec, and of course all our sponsors. Again, we do rely on support, and we're very grateful to the sponsors that do join us on a regular basis and look forward to supporting our events. And so again, I want to mention them again. They're on the screen now, but Genetec, of course, Bosch Security and Safety, Hanwha Techwin, and our media partner with International Security Journal. So again, thanks to you all. You know how much we value your input, and it makes our events go particularly well. So it's important, of course, this doesn't happen by magic. there are some very important people behind the scenes here, not least Derek Maltby, who's been on the panel with me, but somebody who you haven't seen, and I'm not going to call her forward because she's most embarrassed. But Paula Davis she is the major cog in this wheel, and she puts in immense effort to work with ourselves, our sponsors, you, the delegates, to make these events happen. So it's a heartfelt thank you from me as your chair to the people behind the scenes at Global MSC Security that are able to bring these events to you. And all is not lost whilst we've had our second online event because of COVID times, but we sincerely are extremely hopeful that we can come back together in our live forum in Bristol on Tuesday the 19th of October. So for anybody, either UK or indeed internationally, if you want to enjoy a full day of seminar, and with preceding events the night before, we have a gathering and we have exhibition spaces. So it really is a full-on, very valuable event taking place towards the end of this year. Fingers crossed, everything points in the right direction that we'll make it. So you can book your place on that seminar, or indeed an exhibitor stand. Oh no, we're full up. Yeah, we're full up. There's some spaces left. But we go to our website, globalmsc.net, and you can find the booking opportunities there for either a delegate or indeed an exhibitor. So from me to the team here, to the guys at Isted that facilitate the streaming broadcast that brings it to you, and of course back to you, you good selves, it's thank you and it's a goodbye from Global MSC.